Have you ever wondered what it would feel like to be forgotten? Not just to be missed, but to be erased completely, as if your entire existence was a sentence wiped clean from the slate of history. Most places have ghosts, the lingering echoes of those who have died. But some places are different. Some places are hungry. They don't create ghosts. They consume lives, leaving behind nothing but a silent, gnawing question mark. This is the story of such a place. A small, humid island off the coast of North Carolina. Our story begins with Dr. Elias Vance, a historical linguist whose career was built on the obsessive study of dead and dying languages. Elias was not a treasure hunter or a ghost chaser. He was a man of words, a scholar who believed that the greatest mysteries could be unraveled by understanding the grammar of the past. He had a radical, career-defining theory about the lost colony of Roanoke, that the infamous word Croatoan was not a destination or the name of a tribe, but a verb from a forgotten Proto-Algonquian dialect, a word whose true meaning held the key to the colonists' disappearance. He secured a grant to spend 3 months on Roanoke Island, a place now caught between a solemn historical monument and a coastal tourist destination. The island itself felt ancient, breathing a slow, humid rhythm under a canopy of ancient, gnarled live oaks. The air was thick, tasting of salt and damp earth, and the silence of the deep woods was profound. It was not a peaceful silence, but a heavy, watchful one, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for a story it had seen 1,000 times to play out once more. Elias set up his base in a small, isolated research cabin on the edge of the national park, a short walk from the reconstructed settlement known as the Fort Raleigh National Historic Site. This reconstruction was a strange, sterile place, a collection of rough-hewn wooden buildings that felt more like a movie set than a home. During the day, it was filled with the chatter of tourists and the cheerful narration of park rangers. But as dusk fell and the last visitor left, the settlement took on a deeply unsettling atmosphere of profound and patient emptiness. His work was academic and solitary. He spent his days in archives and his nights in the cabin, surrounded by linguistic charts, colonial maps, and spectral analysis software, searching for patterns in the fragmented records of the local Algonquian tribes. He was looking for a ghost, but a ghost made of phonetics and syntax, not spirit and ectoplasm. He was a man of logic, and he was convinced that a logical explanation, however strange, was waiting to be discovered within the structure of a single, misunderstood word. The first unsettling incident was subtle, easily dismissed by a rational mind. It was the sound of the woods at night, or rather the lack of it. There were no crickets, no calls of night birds, no rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. The profound silence that fell over the island after sunset was absolute and unnatural. It was as if the very wildlife of the island knew to go quiet, to hide from something that walked in the dark. Elias noted it in his journal as a local ecological anomaly, a scientific label for a feeling of deep-seated dread. Then came the whispers. While walking the trails back to his cabin late one evening, he heard them, faint, sibilant voices carried on the humid breeze. It was not English, nor was it any Algonquian dialect he had ever studied. The words were guttural, filled with clicks and soft, throaty sounds that felt impossibly ancient, like the sound of shifting stone and rustling leaves given a voice. He told himself it was the wind moving through the Spanish moss, but he found himself quickening his pace, the feeling of being watched prickling the back of his neck. His first tangible encounter with the island's strangeness came a week into his stay. He was exploring an unmapped section of the forest when he found it. A small clearing where the trees grew in a perfect, unnatural circle. In the center was a single moss-covered stone. Carved into its surface was not the word Croatoan, but a strange, spiral symbol he had never seen before. As he reached out to trace its shape, a wave of intense, inexplicable nausea and vertigo washed over him. And for a dizzying moment, the whispers in the woods sounded like they were coming from right beside his ear. The true haunting began, as it always does on Roanoke, at the settlement. Elias was examining the replica of the wooden post where the famous word had been carved. It was a tourist attraction, scarred with the penknives of countless visitors. But as he ran his fingers over the deep, carved letters of Croatoan, the world around him seemed to stutter. The bright afternoon sun flickered, the air grew cold, and he was hit with a psychic flash, a chaotic jumble of images and emotions, profound hunger, the terror of being lost, and the smell of wood smoke where there was no fire. He stumbled back from the post, his heart pounding. The experience lasted only a second, but it left him shaken, his academic detachment shattered. This was not a linguistic puzzle. It was a wound left on the landscape, and he had just touched the scar. That night, the sounds around his cabin changed. He no longer just heard whispers. He heard the distinct, unmistakable sounds of a 16th century colony. The distant cry of a baby, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer, and the faint, melancholic voice of a woman singing an old English lullaby, driven by a mixture of terror and an insatiable academic curiosity. Elias set up audio recording equipment around his cabin. He had to know if he was imagining it. He left the recorders running all night and went to sleep, his dreams filled with images of dense, rolling fog and featureless faces staring at him from the trees. When he played back the audio the next morning, his blood ran cold. The recording was filled with the sounds he had heard: the crying, the hammering, the singing. But underneath it all, his microphone had picked up something else. A low, resonant, humming sound, like the breathing of some vast, sleeping creature. The island was testing him, pulling him deeper into its mystery. One afternoon, a fog rolled in from the sound, thick and unnaturally such. It blanketed the forest in a matter of minutes, reducing visibility to a few feet. Elias was on a trail and became instantly disoriented. The air grew cold and smelled of damp soil, and something else, something vaguely metallic, like old blood. The whispers were all around him now, coming from every direction, weaving in and out of the thick, gray mist. He was no longer just hearing the island's past. He was walking through it. It was in the fog that he saw the first figure. It was a woman in the simple, dirt-stained dress of a colonist, standing motionless among the trees, just at the edge of his vision. He called out to her, thinking it was a park employee in costume, perhaps lost as well. She did not respond. She simply turned her head slowly to face him. Her face was a smooth, blank, featureless expanse of skin. There were no eyes, no nose, no mouth, just a horrifying, empty oval. It was a person who had been rubbed out, erased. Panic seized him. He turned and ran blindly through the fog-shrouded woods. But everywhere he looked, he saw more of them. A man leaning on an axe, his face a similar, nightmarish blank. Two small children holding hands, their heads turning in unison to follow him, their faces smooth and empty. They were not ghosts in the traditional sense. They were not angry or sorrowful. They were just absent shells, the physical evidence of the colony, with their souls scooped out and consumed. He finally burst out of the woods and back onto the main road, the fog dissipating as quickly as it had arrived. He stood there, panting, as a car full of tourists drove past, the occupants staring at the wild-eyed man who had just appeared from the trees. He had seen the answer to the Roanoke mystery. The colonists had not left. They had not died. They had been undone. And the entity responsible was still here, still hungry. And it now knew his name. Elias locked himself in his cabin, the academic turning into a prisoner. He stopped going out after dark. He barricaded his door and covered his windows. But the haunting was no longer external. It was inside with him now. The reflection he saw in his dark laptop screen was his own. But sometimes, for a split second, it would blur, the features softening, threatening to fade. The whispers were now coming from the corners of his own room. They were trying to teach him the word, to make him understand. Croatoan. He pored over his research with a new, frantic desperation. The spiral symbol he had found on the stone. He found a reference to it in the obscure journal of a 17th century missionary who described it as a symbol of a local deity, a god of the earth, of consumption and silence, a god that demanded not sacrifice, but assimilation, a god that ate memories, that fed on the stories and lives of those who trespassed on its soil for too long. Its name, according to the journal, was Croatoan. He finally understood. The word was not a message left behind by the colonists. It was the name of the thing that took them. Perhaps they had carved it as a last, desperate act of worship, a plea for mercy, or perhaps it was a warning. The only thing they had left to give the world before their identities were completely devoured by the ancient, patient intelligence that resided in the very soil and trees of the island. He was not studying a historical event. He was trespassing in a predator's lair. The confrontation came during a violent thunderstorm that shook the island to its core. The power to his cabin went out, plunging him into a darkness broken only by the strobing flashes of lightning. The sounds of the colony were deafening now, a cacophony of life and industry just outside his walls. He could hear their footsteps on his porch, the gentle, testing rattle of his doorknob. He huddled in the center of the room, clutching the stone with the spiral carving, the only tangible link he had to his enemy. A flash of lightning illuminated the window he hadn't managed to cover, and for a horrifying second, he saw dozens of them standing in the rain, their blank, featureless faces turned towards his cabin. The colonists, they had come for him. They were not aggressive, not violent. They simply stood and waited, patient and inevitable as the rising tide. The humming sound he had recorded was now a palpable vibration that shook the very foundations of the cabin. It was the island, and it was demanding its due. He knew he could not stay there. To stay was to be consumed, to have his face, his memories, his very name erased, until he was nothing more than another empty shell walking the woods for eternity. He had to face it. He had to go to the source. With a guttural cry that was half terror, half defiance, he unbarred the door and ran out into the storm, pushing past the silent, unresisting figures on his porch. He ran towards the settlement, towards the post, the epicenter of the island's curse. The reconstructed fort was an absolute bedlam of spectral energy. In the flashes of lightning, the entire space was filled with the blank-faced colonists, going through the motions of their daily lives. A woman churned butter, a man mended a fence. Children played a silent game of tag. It was a perfect recreation of a living town, populated entirely by the erased. And in the center, by the post, stood a figure that was different from the others. It was tall, made of shifting shadows and earth and leaves, and on its face, the spiral symbol glowed with a faint, sickly green light. This was the heart of it, the consciousness of the island. Croatoan. It did not speak, but its voice flooded Elias' mind, a voice of crushing loneliness and an infinite, ancient hunger. It showed him the arrival of the colonists, their fear, their struggle, and then its slow, gentle absorption of them. It was not malicious. It was simply its nature. It was lonely, and it made the people who came here a permanent part of itself, their consciousnesses absorbed into its own, their bodies left as empty puppets to populate its eternal, silent stage. The entity focused its attention on him, and he felt a psychic pressure that threatened to tear his mind apart. It began to pull at his memories, his sense of self. He saw flashes of his own life, his childhood, his university. His parents' faces begin to fade, to lose their color and emotional resonance. He felt his name, Elias, becoming a meaningless collection of sounds. He was being unwritten. The blank-faced colonists began to close in around him, their hands outstretched, not to harm, but to welcome him into their empty fold. In a final, desperate act, Elias did the only thing a linguist could do. He spoke. He did not scream or pray. He looked at the entity and spoke its name, Croatoan, not in fear, but with understanding, with syntax. He then spoke the theoretical Proto-Algonquian verb he had been searching for, a word that meant to release or to let go. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to communicate with the ancient mind in its own language, to reason with an incomprehensible force. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. The figures continued to advance. The pressure on his mind intensified. Then the humming stopped. The tall, shadowy figure seemed to recoil, the glowing spiral on its face flickering violently. The blank-faced colonists froze in their tracks. He had done something no one else had. He had not fought it, or feared it, or worshipped it. He had spoken to it. He had acknowledged its existence and its name. And then he had asked for something in return. The entity did not grant his request, not fully, but his communication had confused it, disrupted its ancient process. It had created a crack in its absolute power. Elias did not wait for a second chance. He turned and fled, pushing through the now frozen figures of the colonists. He ran from the settlement, from the woods, from the island itself. The psychic scream of a frustrated, ancient god echoing in the deepest corners of his mind. He made it back to his cabin. The door was wide open, the inside ransacked. But it wasn't a physical mess. It was a conceptual one. His books were there, but the pages were blank. His laptop was there, but the hard drive was wiped clean. His wallet lay on the floor, and he opened it to find his driver's license. The photo was blurry, the text faded, and his name was a meaningless smudge. He had escaped, but the island had taken its price. It had begun to erase him from the world. He didn't pack. He simply got in his car and drove, not stopping until he had crossed the bridge back to the mainland, putting the dark water between himself and the hungry island. He drove for hours, a man running not from a physical pursuer, but from the encroaching fog of his own forgotten identity. The aftermath was not a scar or a wound, but an ever-expanding void where his life used to be. He checked into a nondescript motel hundreds of miles away. The man at the front desk asked for his name, and for a terrifying moment, he couldn't remember it. He had to look at the smudged license to recall the sounds. Elias Vance, he said. The the name feeling foreign and clumsy in his own mouth. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that one day soon he wouldn't be able to recall it at all. That night, he tried to write down his story, to create a record of what had happened, a warning. But as he wrote, the ink seemed to fade from the page a few moments after he put it down. The words vanished. The story refused to be told. The entity, Croatoan, was not bound by geography. Its curse was a contagious silence, and he was the carrier. He had not escaped the island. He had simply expanded its borders. He is still out there, we can assume, a man with a fading face and a forgotten name, forever looking over his shoulder, not for a ghost, but for the encroaching emptiness. He is a walking, breathing lost colony of one. His very existence is the final, chilling answer to the Roanoke mystery. They didn't go anywhere. They were simply told to forget. And so they did. So the next time you hear a piece of history that ends with a question mark, the next time you visit a place where a tragedy left no trace, be careful. You may be walking on hungry ground, and the silence you hear might not be peace. It might be the sound of a story, a life, a whole colony of people being quietly, patiently, and completely digested